Good evening. At long last, I'm sending you the video that I promised you earlier today. My name is Dr. Michael Berendt. I'm the professor for History 1110-106. I had the pleasure of meeting the other half of the class this morning at noon. We had a great discussion and went well. We missed you, but I'm looking forward to seeing you and having this class with you tomorrow and of course, Wednesday, of course, and the rest of the semester. What I'd like to do today is just to briefly introduce the course to you. I am not sure how long this video is going to be, but I suspect it's not going to be much more than 15 or 20 minutes. It's going to be a little bit dull for today because it's really just going to be me talking. But I would like to just say a few things about the course to pave the way for our first real discussion, which will take place on Wednesday in connection to a brief homework assignment that I am going to be giving you. So a few things just about myself. I believe that this is the 13th year that I will be at App State. And of course, never before have I taught here under these circumstances. So I greatly appreciate your cooperation with social distancing and your willingness to do the course in a hybrid format where we have half the class meeting on Monday, the other half meeting on Wednesday, and maybe on Wednesday we can talk a little bit about how Friday courses will work. And generally speaking, my plan is that the day that you don't meet, there will be some kind of online assignment. I may see if a Zoom session is possible, but in any case, there will be some kind of, but if not that, there will be some kind of recorded lecture. So let me just sort of say a word or two then about the course itself. I know this is a gen ed class, meaning that it's a class that I suspect most of you did not exactly choose to take. It's a requirement. I understand and respect that. But I'd like us to sort of think a little bit about what a class is going to be about that is called history and culture. There's not a lot you can really tell about the class just from that name alone. And in particular, I want to spend a little bit of time in the next few days thinking about exactly what the term culture means. And that is why, with the class that met today, we had a discussion about the very same questions that you were all thoughtful enough to answer via As You Learn that I sent out earlier today. In other words, the first few meetings of this class, specifically Wednesday and Friday, are going to be an attempt to think about and possibly even to try and get some understanding and some definitions of what the word culture means. And I'd like to just react a little bit to some of the responses that you gave me in your As You Learn posts. Which I was pleased that you did and that I enjoyed reading. I'm going to be reading from them a little bit for the next few minutes. I'd just like to share some of the comments that you gave me and then to think about them. So I asked you very basically, what does culture mean? And again, I think it's good to think about what does this word mean if it is, in a sense, part of the focus of this class. So I notice that that some of you provided some definitions, and I'm actually looking at those and trying to figure out how to do this at the same to look at the screen at the same time. So I'm going to have to pause and go back and forth between them. I apologize for this. I'm back. So Grayson provided an interesting definition. He said that it is the characteristics or way of life of a group of people. Then Eli said that culture is what makes a place, a group of people, or an ideology unique. So what they emphasize, and I think this is a perfectly acceptable definition of culture, is the notion that culture refers to how a people lives. So perhaps that could include things like clothing, shelter, the kind of buildings that they live in. Perhaps it could include language. Perhaps it could include the way that they entertain themselves or the kinds of food that they eat. And very much in keeping with that, Eli said that culture is what makes a place, a group of people, or ideology unique. So it's a way of life, if you will, that makes people unique. Sidney then added to that by saying that in addition to being the identity of a group, it could also be an individual identity. And so I think that's really interesting. That adds a sort of different dimension to it. Grayson and Eli's point were about culture as referring to how a group lives. But Sidney says that in addition to that, it could also be something about that reflects a kind of individual identity. So we could, according to that definition, talk about not just the culture of a particular group or society, but of specific people. I might have my culture by that definition. You might have your own. Sorry to keep jumping back and forth. Caleb added a different dimension to it, saying it's how groups of people adapt over time to their customs and the way they live. So we have a slightly different idea there if you think about it. The previous definitions had emphasized that it's the way of life of a group or possibly an individual. Caleb's point, though, is the idea that it has to do with adaptation. It's not just the way of life, but perhaps it's the process of developing that way of life, suggesting that there's a kind of evolutionary aspect of culture, that it can refer to perhaps moving from a situation where you're not especially cultured or you don't really have a culture to one in which you do. And finally, to return to one more, or to come back to mention one more, Brooke comes back to the idea that that culture refers to something that allows a group to have their own unique identity. So we've got a lot of kind of interesting definitions here. Many of them sort of rotate around the same themes, that it has something to do with a group and its identity, and also perhaps to the way that it adapts or changes over time. These are all great definitions, and they are going to be relevant, I think, to the readings that we are doing this week, because they all are possible definitions. Now, the other question that I asked you was, what do you think of this quote that I gave you, that culture is one of the 2 or 3 most difficult languages or words in the English language? And I think that maybe our discussion has given us a reason why that might be the case, which is that we can all give accurate definitions of culture, but we can see it's both a little bit difficult to pin down, and also that there are perhaps multiple definitions: group, individual, evolution, and so on. So the first thing that we're going to be trying to do this week is to see, not necessarily if we can define culture once and for all, but to see if we can get at least a little more clarity about what its meaning is. And hopefully that will help us in the class be aware of what exactly it is we're studying and what kind of questions we're asking. The first reading that you're going to do for Wednesday, and that we'll talk about together in class, is from a writer. I won't tell you anything more about him right now, named Raymond Williams. A little essay simply called Culture, and that quote that I gave you comes from it. So his comment, what he will try and do is explain exactly why the word culture is so complicated, and the reason that he's going to provide has to do with the word's history. This is something that I find very interesting. Words have histories, and there's perhaps things that we can learn from them. So he's going to talk about the very, very ancient roots of the word culture, what it meant originally, how it sort of spread out to other different languages, and the way the meaning of the term changed over time. So that's going to be the subject of your reading for Wednesday, and I will send out an email about that. Let me just say, though, and I'm sorry this can't be more interactive right now. I promise in class it will. Just a little bit about the course itself. So what exactly does history and culture mean for the purposes of this class? So I would ask you to go to the As You Learn site right now, or to your email, and to pull out the course syllabus that I made available on the site and that I sent out to everybody. So if you want to just pause for a second and get that, it would be helpful to look at while I am talking. So if you actually look at, I won't sort of bother reading to you my little sort of blurb about what the course is about. The best way to understand it is to look at the final page. I think it's pages 6 to 7, which is the course schedule. And what you will see is that over the course of this semester, we are going to be looking at, I always forget the exact number, but around 10 different historic cultures. This class is in many ways a class about ancient history, and it's also a global history class in the sense that we're not focusing on one society, but we're focusing on multiple societies across the world. So we're going to look at, we're going to start with early Stone Age societies. We're going to then move on to ancient Mesopotamian society, ancient China, ancient India, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Israelites, the Islamic culture, and finally the culture of the European Middle Ages. So the first thing to know then is that it's a course consisting of units in which we are going to be examining in turn these different past societies. However, and here's, I think, the crucial aspect, for each of those societies, for each of those ancient peoples, we're going to examine them by looking at what I'm going to call a cultural work. And again, we have to define the term a little bit more later this week. But what do I mean by cultural work? I basically mean either a work of art or a work of literature, such as a poem or a story, or a work of philosophy, or a work of religious thought. In other words, what we're going to be doing in this class will feel a lot like a philosophy class on some days, a literature class on others, a religious studies class on still other days. But the idea of it is, in each case, we're going to be using these texts, these ancient works, what I'm going to call cultural works, as a lens for understanding a people from the past. And you might even say, if you want to be a bit mystical, for sort of bringing back to life, to the extent that that's possible, the beliefs, the values, the concerns, and even the lived experiences of a past society. So I'm not going to necessarily point all these books out to you right now, but let me give you an example. We're going to talk about the ancient Sumerian people who lived about, depending on when we're talking about 5,000 years ago, by looking at what is considered to be one of the first works of sort of world literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's an epic poem about a Sumerian hero, but we're going to examine it to see what it can tell us about a past society. We are going to be looking at another one, a work of ancient Chinese philosophy, known in the West as the Analects, by the Chinese philosopher who, again, is known in the United States and the European world as Confucius. We'll talk more about his actual Chinese name when the time comes. So what does this work of ancient Chinese philosophy tell us about the society, in a sense, that kind of gave it to us or that produced it? We're going to be looking at an ancient Indian work of philosophy and religious thought called the Bhagavad Gita, excuse me, which again is kind of a religious mystical poem as a way of understanding some of the concerns of ancient Indian society. Another one that we'll look at is the last one that we'll conclude with, in fact, is one of the most famous works in European literature by the great Italian medieval poet Dante Alighieri, and we'll be reading the first part of his work called the Divine Comedy, which is called the Inferno or Hell. So, and then of course there's other books. I'm not mentioning all of them, but this is kind of the way that the class will work. You know, you'll have this philosophical or literary or religious text, but we'll be using it to examine the as a historical source to think about the society or the people that produced it. Let me just say a word or two about the books. On the syllabus, I have given suggestions for specific editions. You are welcome, and even I would encourage you to purchase those online. However, you do not have to. I will make copies of the texts available through As You Learn for all of our readings. So that's a few things about the course. Let me just sort of look at the syllabus and tell you a few other things. I also would encourage you to make sure that you look thoroughly through the syllabus and ask me any questions that you might have about it on Wednesday's class. Key thing to know, you'll obviously be concerned about assignments and how you'll be graded. Attendance matters, but I just want to emphasize the fact that while the general rule is you're expected to come to class or do the online assignments like listen to lectures, however, obviously in the circumstances in which we find ourselves right now, I'm very conscious of the fact that I need to be flexible. Some students have already contacted me expressing reasons why they can't be in class because of the COVID situation. So I fully understand that attendance is going to be more flexible a category than it is in regular years. Other assignments that you have to do. Each of these civilizations that we look at, again, I don't remember the exact number, but it's sort of around 9 or 10. Will have a short assignment connected to it at the end of the unit. And typically the units will take about 3 to 4 classes. And these will rotate between a short factual 20-question quiz or a short 1-page single-space paper. These are sort of indicated on the course schedule, and I will be announcing them, of course, in class as well. But generally speaking, they are due around the time that we wrap up a particular unit. So you will have quite a few smallish assignments. In addition, there will be a midterm, and there will also be a final and a slightly longer final paper. But of course, the final and the longer paper will be due after Thanksgiving once you go back home and will be fully online. A few other things about the syllabus for now. Uh, I First of all, always feel free that you can be in touch with me. Don't hesitate to send me an email uh, if you would like to speak about any issue related to the class. You can either talk to me after or before class, or we can schedule a Zoom meeting as a kind of virtual office hours. I'm happy to do that at your convenience. A few other things. Uh, do remember that we have certain policies that are very specific to the pandemic situation. You are expected and even required by university policy to have a face covering on during class time. You're expected to observe social distancing, and there is a rule that I believe is explained to you about making sure that you sort of clean up your space at the end of each class. These are all pandemic specific rules. Also note in the syllabus that I have a section in there about how to succeed in class. I don't have that right in front of me right now, but do take that seriously. But off the top of my head, take care of yourself. Show up to class as it is expected. Do the readings for the appropriate day. Think about assignments ahead, even if it's just a little bit ahead. Really basic common sense things like that. So I'm going to start wrapping up right now. I think I've been going for a little over 20 minutes. Class will be much more interactive, I assure you. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in person. You'll see me with a mask on Wednesday, of course. And finally, do remember, I will send this out shortly to do the reading for Wednesday. Let me just say a word or two about that. The reading is already posted as a PDF to As You Learn, and I have given 4 questions to think about. The questions are reading questions, meaning you should think about them and come to class prepared to discuss them. You do not, I emphasize, you do not need to write them up. So that is what I have to tell you. Again, on Wednesday, we'll also take a little bit of a moment to just quickly introduce ourselves. But the subject or the topic of Wednesday's class is, and I'll also ask to see if you have any questions about the syllabus, but is really to get down to a discussion of the first text that we'll be talking about, which is Raymond Williams' text about what the history of the word culture is, why this matters, and what we can learn from it. So I love having discussions with app students, so I'm very much looking forward to our conversation on Wednesday. Be sure to do the reading. Make sure that you watch this video, though I guess if you hear me saying this, you have. And be sure to ask me any questions about the syllabus that you might have, though you're welcome to email me those beforehand. So thanks very much for your patience today. I'm sorry that I'm getting this to you a little bit late, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Have a good evening, and I look forward to both our class on Wednesday and our class together for the rest of the semester. Thank you. Have a good night. See you Wednesday. Bye-bye.